Have you ever been watching Star Wars, Star Trek, Interstellar, The Martian, anything where their space travel just seems a lot cooler than what we have in the modern day? That's because it is. And that's because, well, in short, they all violate the conservation momentum, but it's also because of a little device called a reactionless drive. What a reactionless drive is a hypothetical engine that produces motion without the exhaust of a propellant. So in normal physics, what we have now, you have to exhaust force to the left, which is obviously your fuel source, whatever it may be, in order to go to the right. So like if I wanted to push off to the left, I have to make force with my foot going the opposite direction to go the way I want. A propellantless drive is not necessarily reactionless when it constitutes open systems interacting with external fields, which means like so I'll get to it in a little bit, but there was one that is basically just like it heats things up and it wouldn't work in space because it relies on friction. And that brings me to my next point of Noether, who was a mathematician who basically came up with a theory which is now known as Noether's theorem, which states that there is no fundamental difference from one spatial location to another, which basically means that the laws of physics apply everywhere. Basically, again, goes on to state conservation momentum and energy are absolute regardless of where in the universe it's occurring. One of the first such devices created, because people have tried to create this several times, was known as the Dean drive, created by Norman L. Dean. He unfortunately would never let people like even examine how this thing worked. There were several demonstrations, but after Dean unfortunately passed away, there was no working device found in his possession. And nobody was ever able to recreate a device that produced the same result as his would have in his several demonstrations. Another one of these prototype devices that has been built and tested is the EM drive, also known as the resident cavity thruster. This one was tested, but it appeared to the readings it did show were deemed false after it was just thermal gradients, and then when they tested it via a different method, point suspension, all the readings were gone. The next reactionist drive is just a theorized one by Scottish inventor Sandy Kidd in the 1980s. It's the gyroscopic inertial thruster, or the GIT. It's based on the mechanical principles of rotating mechanisms. Involves various concepts of leverage applied against the support of a large gyroscope. The GIT would be a mass traveling around in a circular trajectory at variable speed. The high-speed part of the trajectory allegedly generates greater centrifugal force than the lower areas, so that there's greater thrust in one direction than the other. He positioned that a gyroscope set with various angles could provide a lifting force defying gravity. In the late 1990s, several people sent suggestions to NASA's Space Exploration Outreach Program suggesting that they dive deeper into this method. However, after years and years of testing, no prototype was ever made, and no conclusions were ever came to. That leads me to one more recently, in 2019, proposed by a former NASA engineer, David Burns. This one is called the helical engine. What it supposedly does is accelerate ions by electric fields and keeps them on a cylindrical path using a magnetic field. And then what those ions do is, as they move from one positive side to the negative side, the ions speed up and impart more momentum on the positive side and come back and impart less momentum on the negative side. However, and after a lot of complicated math and Noether's theorem that I don't really understand 90% of this, I had to be guided through most of it. But if you plug in Burns's equation on how the helical engine is supposed to work through the equation for the law of conservation of momentum, it does not work. So that's the entire problem with this. It just fundamentally does not work. It would, as you could see, it would decrease as the other one increased, so it would remain constant. These are the two ends of the device, so it would negate any momentum it generated, essentially. Even though it doesn't work, it's still a good step in the right direction as we get ever closer to advancing space exploration. I mean, we're pretty much there. I don't know if we already have nuclear-powered spacecrafts. I'm not big into spacecrafts, obviously. I just researched this because I was watching Interstellar the other night, and I thought it would be a cool idea for a video. But this concept has been applied to not just spacecraft. You see it all the time in perpetual motion devices, people trying to make those. And here, I was actually going to make another video about Broder's engine, which I am actually probably going to be making a video on. No, even just seeing how far the science has come in terms of like just getting it to work based off friction, meaning, I mean, obviously it wouldn't work in space, but it's a step in the right direction at least. And then this complex equation from years and years ago that basically is like still being used to disprove stuff now. I was looking at the Noether's theorem. That is ridiculous. I'll have it on screen at some point if anybody wants to look at it. But it's like I'm looking at an alien language. And that's about all. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Until next time.